The first time I found Reiki, it changed my life. It changed the course and direction of my life.
And you give something without expecting something in return.
I'd actually really love to have a conversation with somebody who holds this belief. Welcome, friends, to the Reiki Women Podcast, an exploration into the profound depths of the system of Reiki from a Japanese spiritual perspective and how that relates to our modern lives.
We are keeping it real to Reiki's origins, challenging the New Age stereotype that things like crystals, chakras, and angels are authentic aspects of the system. I'm Bronwyn Logan, and when I'm not writing best-selling books about the Japanese system of Reiki, 75,000 readers and counting, I'm here debunking outmoded Reiki myths and coaching individuals and groups through my website, Reiki with Bronwyn.
And I'm Michaela Daystar, lead teacher and weaver of Heartscapes Reiki, connecting the dots between Reiki and environmental and social justice, because our individual healing cannot be extracted from healing relationship with the collective and with the land.
And I'm Carrie Varela from the Reiki Healing Society, here to help you transform your Reiki practice into a thriving, prosperous business. Because while passion fuels your purpose, it's time to make it sustainable, authentic, and beautifully you. We're three women diving into the heart of Japanese Reiki. We're building a community that centers women's voices and inspires well-being. We're not just for women, we're for everybody. Come join the conversation. Hello, and welcome back to the Reiki Women Podcast. We're excited to kind of further a discussion that came from our last podcast episode. So last time we talked about rules versus ritual, and we had a really nice, rich, deep, nuanced discussion about distinction between rules and ritual. And, just kind of regular old episode here on the Reiki Women Podcast, but it managed to stir quite a bit of discussion over social media and some other different places. And so we thought we would continue this conversation around rules versus ritual, because it seemed like a lot of people had some thoughts about that and have encountered a lot of kind of more rigid or dogmatic rule-based ways of thinking about working with Reiki and the system of Reiki in, their own life. And one of those kind of specific rule-based, or it just kind of feels like an energetic rule that was coming up for some people in our community, was around this idea of energy exchange. It's a rule. You have to share energy exchange in order to receive a treatment, or for the energy to work, or for the healing to work. So we're going to just continue the conversation here about rules versus ritual, and kind of flesh out this whole notion of energy exchange between practitioners and the recipient, and also, maybe some energy exchange between us and Reiki as well. So I would love to pass it over to you, Michaela. What do you think about this conversation?
Yeah, it was such an interesting follow-on to last week. And a colleague of ours brought it up that this is something that he's encountered a lot. It's something each of us have kind of encountered here and there within the Western Reiki community. The idea that there must be an exchange of something, money, some other gift, service, from the recipient of the Reiki session to the Reiki practitioner. And that's something that, comes up in conversation around whether or not people should charge money. But the way that it was being phrased in this follow-up conversation is that exchange was a requirement in order for the Reiki session to work, for the healing to work. And that was a new one for me, to be perfectly honest. The idea that it was like taking an economic principle, right? The idea that for a person to give their time and their energy and their expertise as a Reiki practitioner, that there should be an exchange of some sort, that's good and right. And maybe even, should be a requirement on the kind of human transaction endeavors, financial side of things, the human society side of things. it seems like that idea is getting projected as a spiritual principle when we add this idea that if that doesn't happen, the healing will not work. And that was fascinating to me because, again, I hadn't heard that refinement. And so we were like, yeah, we should definitely talk about that. And so just, to kind of orient us to it, this feels to me like the opposite pendulum swing from another topic that we have had discussion about here on the podcast, which is that there are some Reiki folks that are very averse to receiving money or other forms of material exchange for Reiki. It often comes through as either a kind of guilty anxiety, like I shouldn't take money. I need money because I'm a person living in a capitalist society. I need money, but I feel guilty taking money or material goods in exchange for this beautiful healing art that I want to provide. I would rather just provide it for free, but because I can't, I feel guilty about it. That's one flavor of that. The other is kind of on the other side of that, people being judgmental or critical of those who do take money. So you should not take money. It is unethical or it's wrong to take money for your Reiki sessions. That's a wrong thing to do, and that gets in the way of the purity of the work. And so we've had that conversation on the podcast before and, made the distinction between Reiki as a phenomenon in the world being free and Reiki as a practice engaged by humans that requires time and energy and investment of resources that then gets shared with other people as a, way of being in a physical world. And so we've talked about that. This other piece feels like the opposite extreme reaction, almost like an opposite extreme reaction to this intense feeling over here that either I feel guilty because I have to take money or I'm judgmental because other people are taking money. So we have this opposite extreme that says you have to take money or some other form of material or service exchange. Some sort of exchange has to happen. If you're giving Reiki, you must receive something or the Reiki will not work. And that struck me as just wild. And I've been sitting with, okay, what is so wild about that? What is it that's really caught my attention about that? And I think where I want to start before passing it off is that this is first of all, a fundamental misunderstanding of what Reiki is and how Reiki operates. We have talked in many contexts about that, about the way in which Reiki from its origins, the way that Reiki is understood as a phenomenon in the world that is part and parcel of who and what we are, and that Reiki as a practice is a system of practices that helps humans to focus our attention on that phenomenon for various outcomes. And so fundamental misunderstanding of what Reiki is and what the practice is actually here to do. But even more so than that, I want to kind of focus in there. It's almost a violation of the fourth precept, which says that we have to be true to our way in our being. And for me, this is a classic conflation of the way and the being, right? Because our way is our daily life, our day-to-day existence as a human, the experiences that we have, the choices that we make, the needs that we have in the material world as a person in a body, in a community, in a culture, in the world, in nature, in society. And that we have to walk a path through our life that is true to who we are, which includes our needs. It includes making sure our needs are met. It includes making sure we're kind and considerate and compassionate in getting our needs and setting boundaries with people around our needs. So, being true to ourselves, being true to goodness and compassion, and rightness, right? As we make decisions throughout our life. And we also want to be true to our being. And our being is referring to our spiritual essence, to our existence as life expressing itself in this moment of our experience, but that ultimately we're part of an interconnected web of life, web of energy. And being true to that is where, the energetics and the ephemera and the esoterics of practicing Reiki, kind of exists. And so if we're going to be true to our way, living in a capitalist society, unless we're independently wealthy or supported by someone else, yeah, if we're going to focus our attention on Reiki and we're going to devote our employment hours to sharing Reiki with others, then it is good and right to receive compensation for that, to have an energy exchange. And it feels to me that the anxiety, the tension between these extreme opposites, particularly that tension of the guilt of taking money for Reiki, perhaps somehow metastasized into this projection of this, financial reality of being true to our way, that we have to get our needs met, which means we have to earn money, into a spiritual concern, like making a physical financial concern, like projecting it, injecting it, forcing it into spiritual principles. And so to say that it is a rule of Reiki as a phenomenon in the world, that you must have an energy exchange in order for the energy to work properly, to me, lands as a gross metastasization of the anxiety that so many people in our community have around money and the guilt that so many of us carry around money. That in order to alleviate that guilt, we have to actually imagine or create a spiritual principle, a rule that tells us that we must take money in order for it to be effective. And that makes me feel really sad. I feel really sad for us if that is really a belief that people have. It's so rigid and it's so unkind. And it's so unkind to people who don't want or need to take money. It's so unkind to every moment that any of us have just shared Reiki with a friend because we love them, and we want to just be with them in Reiki. I think there's a lot of really sad and also dangerous implications of putting this rigidity around this concept and calling it a rule and saying that Reiki won't work unless we follow this rule. So that is what came up for me, and I'm going to pass it over to Bronwyn. What came up for you when you've encountered this concept in the wild, as I know you have, and as we thought about it today?
Yeah, I have heard of it. And as you say, that's sort of like we have these two extremes happening. The term energy exchange, I feel, is a pretty awful term. Yeah, just because there seems to be an awful lot of expectation around this terminology. There's a lot of pressure around this terminology. And who decides, is the energy exchange equal, right? Did you give me enough for that? Didn't you give me enough for that? I mean, what you just said, all the stuff about money, I'm not going to say anything more about that because I think you got it, right? You nailed that. And it's true. We have issues around money. And, I think you were saying trauma around money. And I think it plays out in this sort of scenario. But the concept of it as being about money, really, I mean, I'm bringing it down to that, right? Well, if I give you something, you have to give me something back. This idea is very transactional, it's conditional. And if I think about the word Reiki, it is not conditional, it is not transactional. The kanji rei, expressing the natural flow of the universe, how it works. Yeah, so the earth and the heavens coming together, creating life, and us doing our practice, us being those little shamans in the kanji doing our practice every day, meaning we're on the right path because we're working in a way that is in line with our divinity. our inner divinity, and in doing so, the blessings coming down. There is a story to that, and there is a way, and it is a natural way. It is not something that has expectation placed on it. How about this as a question for you? Can you give something without expecting something in return? For me, that is an important question. And I think that that is about compassion. And so you took the fourth precept, take the fifth precept, compassion, being there for yourself and others as a natural part of our divine existence. This is not about, oh, I'll only do it if you do this. That is not that story. This is the story of this is how we exist, and we all exist together in this natural flow. I can think of a really great example of this. If you are doing Reiki with an animal, I can't say to that animal, I will only do this for you if you do something for me. Otherwise, I cannot do this. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. So we need to make sense of what we're doing. We need to have a deep think about why we would expect something from someone or something, because that's not what this is about. Sure, if I'm a professional Reiki practitioner, as you spoke about, Michaela, then I need a livelihood to be a Reiki practitioner, right? So that's a totally different story. And it's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a rule that it will not work if I do not get something back. And it just doesn't work. To me, it's very paternalistic. It's like me saying, I know what's best for you. You have to give me something for this to happen. Otherwise, it doesn't work, right? It takes away a person's agency and their ability to actually decide for themselves, some level, maybe not consciously, about their own healing. Yeah. So, think we need to think of the world as we're all different, and psychologically we're different. I always thought of this concept as something about human nature and people saying, well, humans won't do anything unless you make them pay for it in some way. Right? For sure, that might be true for some people. Don't stick us all in the same basket. And I think that is there to assuage the guilt of asking for something, as you've already mentioned. For some of us, it might be true that we do feel like that. You know, if I pay a lot of money, I'm going to value it more. For some people, yes, but not for all people. So we can't put us all into that basket. Instead, we could look at the psychology of it. We could look at other things that can support people in finding ways to help them heal. If we're doing it because we say it's going to help someone heal, maybe there are other ways as well. But what I'm saying is that with animals, we're not actually making any decisions about them and about how they heal and how they choose to heal. We're simply offering ourselves. Yeah. And when we offer ourselves, they have the choice to be there with us in that energy or not. And if we were to go back to the beginnings of this practice, did Usui charge? We don't know. We know that the association charged, the Japanese association, that's common in Japan, that people pay money to be a member of an association. And actually, they respect associations a lot more than probably we do in the West, and they pay quite a bit of money for that. But that's, once again, it's not about, oh, if I don't pay, I won't get. Yeah. So think about your practice. Think about what Ray means. It means to be in the flow. There are no rules, as we said in the last podcast, no rules in this. And really, it's just about being open. And also, it seems to be fearful. So if I'm doing fearful stuff, I'm doing this, or I'll only get this if this. But if I'm open, if I have that lovely sense of openness and being with people, then that is truly where I want to be with my practice. I don't want this. This is not my practice. And yet that's what this is encouraging. So if I'm doing this, if I'm open, for example, this podcast that we're doing right now, we do this podcast with an openness to be there for the people who listen to this podcast. And we don't do it by saying, we'll only do this if you pay us $1 million, but you're welcome. You could pay it. It's okay. Hey, don't you think? We do it with an openness of heart. And this is part of our practice. This is a part of our Reiki practice. And being there for people, supporting the Reiki community.
Well, I love all that you've shared thus far. And I think all really important things to consider. Where I land in all of this. Well, first of all, I see this notion of this energy exchange. You have to be compensated for, providing a Reiki session. I think I see it as a legacy from Takata. I could be wrong about that, but it sounds something very much in line with something that Takata would say, and kind of her way of speaking about Reiki, which is based on, a respect, a reverence, and a reciprocity for a practitioner, for Reiki itself. And I have tremendous respect for Takata. I often think of her and her pioneer spirit and how brave and courageous she was to share Reiki. And really, I think of it as such a miracle that, Reiki came through her. And it was like the Reiki, its tender roots were so tender. And she was just a strong, blazing pioneer that brought Reiki to 22 Reiki masters that, she charged 10 grand to receive the training, sometime in the years between 1940 and 1980. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of money. And it was through even, one of those students of the 22 that she trained, one of those students decided to teach Reiki 3 at a reasonable rate, right? And that one student of hers taught 2 people and trained them to the Reiki 3 level. And that one person, of those 2 people, one person actually then went on to train other people. And that person's name was Arthur Robinson. And he combined Reiki with some Tibetan shamanistic techniques. And he trained thousands of people in Reiki, but to the Reiki 3 level. He would do weekend Reiki 3 trainings and have 100 people in the room, right? So it's like very tender pathways, these very small pathways that allow Reiki to take root into our society. And is one of the reasons why I have this healing art in my hands. And, we're sitting here on this podcast. So all that to say, I have tremendous respect for Takata and the lineage of Reiki. But as we all know, many of the things that Takata said were just wrong. They weren't actually correct. Whether it be, there might be some debate about this, but some of the historical context of who Yusui was. And then, I think just with this concept, as I think we've all just have this opinion, is that this energy of reciprocity, like you have to pay your practitioner for it to work. It's just not true. It's just not true. And so we can kind of reject that as not true. And I think it all speaks, back to our rules versus ritual as this non-dogmatic way of holding spirituality, where we begin to explore what is my truth, what is really true for me. And when I feel the truth in my body, how does that feel? When I feel like the truth or something that doesn't seem like truth, how does that feel in my body? Um, you know, um, my experience of spirituality is I think that there are rules, spiritual laws, guidelines that I probably somehow karmically am aware of, I'm operating on, but I don't really know what those are. It's all a part of the mystery. And I do know that Reiki works, and it works by intention, by simply having that intention to place one hand on somebody and the Reiki will flow, being intentional about, inviting Reiki to flow for me or for somebody else. And just being true to, I mean, I think this notion of reciprocity is a beautiful thing, right? Like, I mean, we should want to feel like we're part of this ebb and flow, this giving and taking, this giving and receiving in our life. And actually, if we pay attention to that, it can be a beautiful spiritual principle, that things are coming to us and we're receiving things. And a lot of the things that we think, are so important as like have, a specific dollar amount value on it. There's a whole notion, there's a whole nother layer of value and exchange that's happening without monetary, transactional thing. And I think that's what you were talking about, Michaela. Is like, let's like distinguish between what's like a spiritual reciprocity and a monetary capitalist reciprocity, right? So some of that I think still consists inside of the Reiki practice, like, that Reiki considers both the recipient and the practitioner worthy of receiving Reiki. So when I'm in a Reiki session, I'm receiving Reiki just as much as I'm giving it. There's this kind of beautiful flow that's happening, and it's not just from me to them. It's a larger maybe pyramid, right? Where like Reiki's come in on the top and practitioner and the recipient here on the bottom. Um, and so, and then yet we have to put value on something that is priceless. And that's what Reiki is. It's not that to say that it's free. It's not free. It's free by who? But, by Takata's blood, sweat, and tears and her whole life that she dedicated to this practice so that we can have it. That wasn't free, but it was priceless. And there is no value on it. And I don't know. I think in my own spiritual journey with Reiki, it's invited me time and time again to sit with what really matters and what's really valuable. When you think about life force energy, um, and as a practitioner too, of just worry, stress, anxiety about money, and especially at the beginning of my Reiki practice, and becoming a Reiki practitioner, I was so super stressed about investing in anything in my business, whether it be like learning another certificate, gaining a new skill, and any sort of financial expenditure just felt so overwhelming. And I always felt this actually encouragement from Reiki to like just keep investing in myself and like gifts as a healer. And I've really come to understand it's actually that my body is like this priceless piece, right? My mind, my clear and true heart. Like these are the things that really matter. And um and that like that's somewhat of the practice, is that's that's the true spiritual heart of the practice. What we're trying to return to is those real truths that we know deep in our being, and to place value on the other things in life that just are beyond the monetary exchange. Like we eat our food really mindfully, and feel all the people who farmed that food and gave it to us, and to feel the earth in that, and to feel the life force in the food as well. And yeah, so those are a little handful of thoughts I have. But true to what Bronwyn was saying, and so true, is that, we show up every week for this podcast, almost every week. I skipped a couple weeks recently, but we show up every week because not because anybody's paying us, because this is something that we're doing to give. And there is an energetic reciprocity coming back to us because, of course, it connects us to all of our beautiful listeners. And some of those listeners have come back into our, lives and become paying clients for myself or Michaela, for Bronwyn. So if you're that client and that person on this podcast, we love you. So appreciate you. Thank you for that reciprocity. But this is our time in the podcast to talk a little bit about what's cooking in our Reiki kitchen, what offerings we're doing, what's given our practice, and how we're both earning money, but also supporting and sharing the practice of Reiki to our people. So, Michaela, do you want to speak about what's going on in your practice?
Yeah, I will reiterate what I shared last week, which is that enrollment is now open for my 9-month Reiki program that guides students all the way through the full system of Reiki in a format that is both structured and flexible, that is individualized and kind of co-created with the group based on what people are really excited to learn and experience. And that, brings people back in touch with the truth of their connection to themselves, to each other, and to the earth as, the practice not only, or the promise not only of our program, but of Reiki itself. So enrollment is open for that. I'd love to have conversations with folks who are curious, who have questions. The time is now. We begin in October. Going on for you, Miss Bronwyn?
I just thought I'd let people know that they can, if they come to my website, Reiki with Bronwyn, they can book in by the hour to actually get personal private training with me, online or in person, whatever works, wherever you are. And I will support you wherever you are in your practice with what you're developing. So if you're wanting to know more about the Japanese aspects of the system in your practice, if you'd like to know more about symbols and mantras, whatever it is that you feel that you would like to get more out of the system with, then sign yourself up and meet you probably on Zoom. We will look at exactly what you need right now. Harry, what have you got?
I'm having this wave of nostalgia because I remember that when I first contacted you, Bronwyn, that was how I contacted you, was just booked an hour with you to talk. I was really wanting to explore the Japanese origins of Reiki. So yes, please get in touch with Bronwyn and get in her energy and all that she has to teach us. Yeah, so big in my world is the GoPro with Reiki mentorship program. It's a year-long program that's really designed to help you advance as a practitioner, to gain more skills. It includes Michaela's trauma-informed Reiki course and so many other resources, really to help you build a practice that's aligned with your heart, with your integrity, your vision for what you want to create as a Reiki practitioner. Um, and I also recognize that a lot of times, we have multiple passions, multiple pursuits as a Reiki practitioner. So a big part of the course too is just help you bring and weave those passions together in a way that really supports your ideal clients, gives them an elegant and beautiful pathway to work with you and learn what they're there to learn and heal with you. So the doors are open for GoPro with Reiki through September, and please reach out if you're interested. Also, hit me up for a 30-minute call, free call anytime you want. If there's questions that you have for me and just want to make that personal connection, I'd love to talk with you. All right, Michaela, what are your concluding thoughts? We've got a few minutes here. What are your concluding thoughts on energy exchange versus ritual and everything else that we've been talking about today?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts. One of the thoughts that I keep having is like, I'd actually really love to have a conversation with somebody who holds this belief. So if you do hold this belief and somehow you're still here listening after we've been like trashing this belief of yours this whole time, sorry. We don't mean to be harsh, but we disagree. But I am very curious to have an honest, respectful, compassionate conversation with somebody who holds this belief because I have so many questions. Like, yeah, what happens if you're going through your day and there's some opportunity to be in Reiki with somebody and there's, no exchange expected? Like, do you just not do that? Or, I don't know. I have so many questions. But I loved, that you brought it back to compassion, Bronwyn, and like really rooted it back into what is this really about? And I think that this is one of the reasons that we are so insistent on this podcast and each of us individually in our practice and our conversations to make the distinction between the phenomenon of Reiki, spiritual energy, that it just, if you hold these beliefs that we do, simply is a phenomenon of the world. It's what binds us and animates us and interconnects all things in the universe. It is what we are. The distinction between that, the phenomenon of Reiki, and the practice of the system of Reiki, which is a series of actions and principles and practices enacted by people with the intention of teaching us to focus our attention on the phenomenon of Reiki. And I just, in things like this that are, you used the term earlier, Carrie, when we were talking about this offline of dogmatic, like these, making it this rule that there has to be some form of energy exchange, or there has to not be an exchange, right? Like, is again, those two dualistic extremes that we've addressed, both of them now, that, it is a rule that you should not take money for Reiki, or it is a rule that you should take money. And I'm using money as an umbrella term for something, right? An exchange of something. In order for the phenomenon of Reiki to do what it is supposed to do. This conflation of those two things is incredibly concerning. And it's particularly in the way that it limits what Reiki is, right? And it disregards what Reiki is, which is utterly unimpeded by anything that we are up to here in our lives, right? How we choose to run a business, whether we choose to take an energy exchange, how we conduct our Reiki sessions, whether or not we're ethical inside of our Reiki sessions. None of that, none of those things that are part of our way, walking our way, living our life, impacts the phenomenon of Reiki even at all. Reiki is Reiki. It is what it is. We can choose whether or not to focus our attention on it and how we engage with it, how we bring it into our lives. And the more that we do bring it into our lives, free from the expectation of anything other than our honest engagement with it, the more we be Reiki, a phrase that we often use on this podcast. The more we move through our lives as an embodiment of Reiki and emanating Reiki more powerfully because of the focus of our attention, and that influences the people around us. That is the mechanism through which we share Reiki with each other. And so the idea that whether or not we receive something for Reiki, in order for Reiki to be what it is it's not only profoundly limiting, but it's a very troubling view. And I think that you really nailed it, Bronwyn, when you linked it with paternalism and patriarchy and, a capitalist patriarchal society that sets up these hierarchies of value. Reiki it's almost valueless in the sense that it simply is what it is. So, I think where I land, if you ask for final thoughts, I'll give you final thoughts. I think where I want to land is encouraging all of us to truly grapple with and to practice in our mindset and in our words, making the distinction between the phenomenon of Reiki and the practice of Reiki. Because I think if we do that, dogmatic, dualistic, hard and fast rules like the one we're discussing today kind of dissolve away, or at least they find their proper place, right? Let's at least have the conversation about it's a rule that there needs to be an exchange squarely in the column of human endeavors within a capitalist society, right? You could say, if you've invested time and effort and money into learning the system of Reiki, and then you're going to share that with other people, then you should take money for it because that sets a precedent that this is valuable, that people should pay for. That's a valid position to have. It's not the position I have, but I can at least understand that position. But to bleed that in to the spiritual mechanism and make it a spiritual rule, to say that Reiki as a phenomenon that goes far beyond our own human conception is not going to work if we have not received some material compensation. I don't know. I feel like I must be misunderstanding what I have been told about this rule again. I want to have a conversation. What exactly do you mean by that? What are the implications of applying that rule to your Reiki practice? And what are the implications on the fifth precept, as Bronwyn said, just for today, I'm compassionate for myself and others. This is a system of practice that is built on the foundation of Buddhism. And Buddhism leans heavily into non-duality, interconnection, and compassionate kindness. To give compassionately of yourself with no expectation of payment at all is that, principle of how we be in the world. And so I think ultimately, if this is, in fact, a rule that people are applying to themselves and others, it's in fundamental opposition with what the system of Reiki actually is, what the phenomenon of Reiki is, foundations of Reiki are. And even in the Western context, which I'm not going to get into because that's not what we talk about here, this podcast, it still doesn't make a whole lot of sense in that context either. So that's where I'm going to land on it. And I'm going to pass it along to Bronwyn.
Yeah. I always say, we're not about, like, you can't cut my energy out. So, because I'm a part of the world. So if that's the case, it's this idea that I am in Reiki, but Reiki is in me. And there is this perpetual flow. So to say that I could cut myself off from something else because of there not being an exchange, well, in truth, there's always an exchange. I mentioned us in this podcast. Yes, we are doing this for the Reiki community. And the exchange is one that it's not something that we sit down and we cognitively think about. But there is an exchange because with what we're doing, we have, as I was saying, that lovely openness. And we're here for the people, and whose ever ears that falls upon them, that's for them to process, be, and pass that on. It's just a very natural flow. It's not something that is decided by us as to how much or less that we are giving or not giving and what we're getting back. Just us being in that, there is just this natural, beautiful flow that exists. So we don't need to up that and do things to that. And we can definitely develop it more. And that is what we do when we practice the system of Reiki. It helps us to become more and more open for each other. I think that really is the purpose of our practice. So it doesn't really align, as you were just saying, Michaela, with this idea of there being this very cognitive give and take. Just a little bit about the history. I mentioned Usui before, and we don't know if he charged, but a student and friend of his, Oguchi Toshihiro, he wrote that when he was with the Japanese Reiki Association, he didn't agree. This is after Usui died. He didn't agree with the amount of money that they were charging, and he found it, quite ridiculous, and he left. So that was his personal take on things. Prior to that, he had been working with and was a friend of Usui's. So it does say something to us if we really want to look at the monetary aspect of it all, and that Usui may not have charged, or if he did, maybe it was donations, or maybe it was just a small amount of money. So just financially, that's sort of like a historical little bit there that I think might help people if they're thinking that it always has to do with money. And I can't see that spiritual practice to do with money. And that is the difference between having a business and just having a personal spiritual practice. And we can blend these things together. We can also separate these things. So in the terms of, I can have a spiritual practice, but I don't have to have a business. Yeah. If I have a business, I need to charge money and I need to make a living, because that's what a business is in this world that we live in. Harry, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that you guys are saying, and I don't know if anybody who has that belief is still listening. They still be listening right now. I mean, I just think it's just of the importance of thinking for yourself, right? And I know that there were a lot of norms and ways of being in relationship with Reiki that I didn't really resonate with in my journey. Like things like Reiki can do no harm. Um, you know, it's kind of like it feels, as much as I love the idea, and I do think that Reiki is very pure and benevolent and kind, but the spiritual process isn't always super gentle. It isn't always so like, everything's roses. It does invite us to our edge. Sometimes it does invite transformation and change. So, and that can look messy and uncomfortable, and it can be, it is just what it is, right? So, and sometimes when we set things up, we set the tone saying, Reiki can do no harm. Talked about the distinction. Can Reiki do no harm with practitioner? I mean, if practitioners can do harm, energy can't do harm. Well, this is all just things you have to consider for yourself, right? That Reiki heals past karma. Well, I've talked about this in the past too. Karma is a profound, cultural understanding about the law of cause and effect. And if you think that, offering a Reiki session has no effect on people's lives, I would tell you that I am an example of why that's not true. Because the first time I found Reiki, it changed my life, changed the course and direction of my life. So I definitely think there's karma with that, but it's a good karma. It was a good thing. I'm grateful for that, right? So, these things we just have to think for ourselves, and we get to pick and choose. And that's the beauty of having a modern spiritual practice, is where we don't have to follow, what the book says about Reiki. We can listen into our own inner truth and have that direct experience with spirituality. Um I keep thinking about too a conversation we had recently about rates and prices, and I'm not sure, I can't recall the exact title of that episode, but I'm having this kind of remembering of the path of the Buddha, right? Is that I went to go see the spot where he was in the emaciated Buddha space, right, where he was like starving himself underneath the Bodhi tree, and the milkmaid came and gave him some rice and some milk, and he took that, and it was this kind of returning back to life and balance. And this was the way that spirituality was webbed into life in our ancient cultures and traditions, right? Where spirituality was valued. These sages who were meditating in the cave, like they would come out of the cave and they would share their teachings with whoever wanted to receive them. And the exchange was food, or the exchange was clothing, or whatever else that person needed. So, and that was part of the society. And so in our modern life, we don't have those kinds of, some have a little bit of that, right? Obviously, there's nuns and monks and the Buddhist tradition and many other traditions. But we're stepping out and living our spirituality in our modern world, including having children and households and all of those things that were rules in other societies at different times. So it requires us to rewrite the rules and to put value for ourselves on our services, certainly, but also to remember the beauty of just giving of a free heart with no strings attached. And that's that's a beautiful thing. I think Reiki will respond to that. So when we see somebody on the side of the street who's begging for money, or a friend who's in need, there's no reason why not to send Reiki and support them, if they're open to it. And of course the healing will work. And of course, that energy will respond to those intentions. Um, Especially when we do it from an open heart.
place of compassion. So.
Well, thank you all so very much for listening to this conversation. I hope it continues to spark some inquiry, some self-exploration, some inner questioning around what feels true to you in terms of energy exchange in your life, in terms of rules and rituals. We didn't even talk about ritual today, but there's something beauty about that too. Maybe another follow-up conversation about ritual. So we wish you well from our hearts to yours. May you have a blessed and beautiful day. And may you feel like you're in the flow of giving and receiving always. Till next time, see you then.